Would you believe me if I told you that he shot his first feature film for less than $6,000? There was no film school safety net, no big time producer, just a guy lugging his 16mm camera around hoping that the film stock didn't run out. This is how Christopher Nolan got his start, and how that tiny no budget film gave way to one of the biggest directors who would go on to reinvent the blockbuster genre. Before the Oscars and the billion-dollar box office runs, he was just a kid obsessed with movies and cameras. He grew up in London making little 8mm films with his friends, with his dad's camera, experimenting with stop motion and little special effects. He didn't go to film school, but rather he decided to study English literature at University College London. And whilst he was there, he joined the Film Society and decided to make very good use of their equipment and facilities. That mix, the storytelling degree with the technical knowledge that he gained from the Film Society using the equipment to create little short films, proved invaluable during his career, especially for his first feature film. He was thinking more like a writer and a puzzle maker, putting all the different pieces together and trying to make do with the best what he had available to him. However, none of these short films provided an instant break for him after university. He decided to go on and create industrial films and commercial films for businesses whilst honing his skills and saving some money on the side. And then he decided to do the thing that terrifies most new filmmakers, to shoot a new feature film with no money and no resources. And what this results in is a 70-minute noir film called Following, which is a thriller about a writer who follows strangers in and around London. So at this point, Nolan knows a few things, right? He can't compete on budget, he doesn't have the resources to pull off some of the insane stunts that he would go on to create, and he doesn't have access to A-list cast or anyone like that to help him put the project together. So he decides to compete on control by utilizing everything that is within his own control. So writing a script that uses minimal locations and minimal cast, something that can be pulled together with a minimal crew with a very small budget. He designs the story from the ground up with resources that he has access to, such as apartments that belongs to his friends, the London streets, pubs, cafes that would let him shoot, and his own ability to use the camera to create the shots. So he knows he can't compete with all the fancy stuff that the big studios have the resources to do, but he can write something that feels much bigger in scope by utilizing the structure of the film. So rather than going for a straightforward linear storytelling method, he decides to use some non-linear techniques to make the film feel much bigger in scope. So I think the key takeaway here is his mindset. He doesn't wait for someone to give him permission to shoot anything or tell him that, okay, you're ready to do a feature. He decides to take control and do it himself by utilizing all the resources that he has available to him at this stage. But making all these decisions is good enough, but what's much more difficult is actually putting it into action and going out there and creating it, especially when you can barely afford the film stock. So to actually pay for this, he comes up with a very simple strategy. So he decides to do a day job, save up whatever money that he can each month, buy a little film stock, what he can afford, and then shoot what he can every weekend, slowly putting the film together weekend by weekend, shooting on Saturdays. Because like him, most of the cast and the crew also had day jobs, so that's the only time that everyone could come together. Because he was shooting on film, and film was so expensive, he decides to rehearse each scene over and over again until it becomes fluid and second nature to the actors, resulting in only having to do each shot 1 or 2 takes, and then moving on to the next one to save time and film. One other thing is that he kept the crew tiny. Oftentimes it was just him, the sound person, and then the actors. That meant less coordination, less budget, less people to feed, and the ability to shoot on real locations more easily. The gear was minimal. A 16mm camera, available light, practical lamps in the locations, no big lighting trucks, no elaborate rigs. He chooses black and white because it makes it easier to color match and get away with not having the best lighting equipment. For locations, he uses what he could get for free. His own apartment, his friends' apartments, cafes that would let him shoot if they promised to stay out of the way. Anything that he could get his hands on. Even the schedule was optimized for this super low budget type of filmmaking. They shot mostly on Saturdays across multiple months. This meant that production was really slow, but it let the project happen without anyone needing to quit their jobs or needing a huge lump sum amount of money up front, and that everyone could use the time that they had free after work to go out and make their dreams come true. The cast was mostly friends and people from the local theatre circles, not A-list actors, but people that he knew would come up and show up and be there on time. Because he was paying for the film stock himself with money that he had left over from his paycheck, he made sure not to have any crazy coverage or any extra angles that was not needed, and this meant that the film was very minimal, lean, and it kept to the core points of the story. The handheld shooting and the natural light weren't just artistic decisions that he decided to do after watching a French New Wave film. It was partly due to the constraints that he had, but it allowed the film to have a sort of gritty energy that became a very important thing when it was in the festival circles, because it made it more real and raw. Without monitors or a big crew, he had to frame through the lens, trusting his instinct. This became invaluable later on when in his career he would go on to create some of the most complex, elaborate sequences. The editing was also clever. By utilizing non-linear editing techniques, he could fix some of the continuity issues and make the film feel much bigger than it was. The hidden lesson here is that form and structure is something that you can completely use and utilize to make up for not having a huge budget. By using his creative ideas, he makes the film feel much larger in scope with what he had. So after a lot of hard work, a very long shooting schedule, he managed to finish the film. And when it releases, it doesn't go on to create some insane box office results. But what it does do is run the festival circuits at places like Slamdance. Reviewers pick up on the sharp writing and the bold structure. That festival bus then leads on to some meetings with production companies and agents. Following never makes huge results at the box office, but it proves that Nolan can take a story from the script to the screen with no resources. So with these new connections and the agents and production companies and everyone interested, this time he creates a new project called Memento. Again, built around a strong structural hook, but this time with actual financial backing of the studios. Because this time around, producers and financiers are actually interested because he actually has a feature completed, not just a script and a dream. Memento breaks out in a big way. Festival awards, critical acclaim, and a cult audience. And that's the film that really pulls him into Hollywood and makes much bigger projects like the Dark Knight series possible. But all of this traces back into that scrappy little black and white film that is shot over multiple weekends with no money or resources. Nolan's story isn't that one day he wakes up and someone gives him the Batman series and he goes on to make billions at the box office. It's about a guy that utilizes everything that he can to stretch a few rolls of 60mm film into a fully developed feature film. He didn't wait for film school or a producer to come along. He just used all the resources that he had and made a film around those limitations and managed to get it from a story in his head to a feature in the theaters. The lesson here is that the first film that you have to do as a director doesn't have to be some huge blockbuster or some crazy story. But what it does need is a strong idea, a structure that makes it feel bigger than it is with the limitations that you have, and the discipline to actually finish it.